talking to William Jacobson, Cornell Law Professor, the mind behind legalinsurrection.com. It was on this show, I think on one of the live streams, where you discussed the fact that an impeachment inquiry should happen. You were the first person I heard discuss it. I credit the entire impeachment inquiry to you being on this show, having this conversation with me, sir.
Well, of course, it never would have happened without me being on your show.
This is fact, and you can quote it. It's done. It's said. It must be true. I want to share with you a couple of things that happened. One, during the impeachment inquiry with Jonathan Turley, George Washington law, and then a couple of statements that came after. This was a question that was asked by Congressman, a Democrat, a part of the Progressive Caucus, Ro Khanna, out of California. Listen.
Can you explain to the committee and the country why you believe that the current evidence does not support the articles of impeachment today?
Well, at the moment, these are allegations, and there is some credible evidence there that is the basis of the allegations.
But I understand that, and I'm not questioning that. I'm questioning what you don't think today, if you were going to vote, if this was the case, you would vote no, correct?
On this evidence, certainly, because the inquiry...
Okay, and my question is, if someone said to you, okay, Mr. Turley, why are you voting not to impeach President Biden based on this evidence? Where do you think the evidence is lacking? Where does it not rise to the level where you think it needs to be? What are the places that you think is missing?
Well, I said in my testimony that the key here that the committee has to drill down on is whether they can establish a linkage with the influence peddling, which is a form of corruption, and the president, whether he had knowledge, whether he participated, whether he encouraged it.
Now, I agree. That's the link that has to be made. But I thought the question itself was peculiar, because isn't the purpose of an inquiry to see where these things go? It's not like they walk in with nothing. They walk in with bank records and text messages and a host of things. That kind of questioning happened a lot. It was Representative Ocasio-Cortez who asked all of the people there who were testifying, do you have any firsthand knowledge of a crime committed by the president? And they all said no. As Stephen Miller wrote on Twitter, he does work at Fox News, did you actually see somebody hand a bag full of money with a big dollar sign on it over to Joe Biden? The question itself seems to be an unwillingness to accept the fact that there's some serious smoke here. What was your take on that exchange?
Yeah, well, that exchange, I didn't watch the entire hearing. I have seen clips and I've seen reports, particularly with regard to Turley. The Democrats are so much better than the Republicans at asking completely irrelevant questions and then somehow acting like they're actually decisive in this case. The question to Turley, and the reason he was there, was whether there was enough to start an inquiry, not to take a vote today, okay? And so they ask that question, but then they turn it around later and say, aha, and they show clips. Jonathan Turley says there's not enough evidence to impeach. Well, that's not why he was called to testify. This isn't an impeachment vote. This is not an impeachment trial. This is the opening of an inquiry, because there's certainly strong circumstantial evidence, maybe more than circumstantial, that Joe Biden was selling influence through his son Hunter, and that this was a family business, and that money that goes to Hunter and other family members is really a benefit to Joe Biden. This was enriching his family. So there's plenty to go on, that there's justification to open an impeachment hearing process. But just like, at a trial, you don't say to the jury before the opening statements, do you vote guilty or not guilty? Well, let's hear the evidence, then I'll decide. Okay.
That's exactly it. Let me give you another piece. This was in a 1-2 punch with Alex Wagner on MSNBC. It was Pete Buttigieg, the Secretary of Transportation, and Adam Schiff. Let me start with Congressman Adam Schiff, who, of course, led the charge about the impeachment of Donald Trump, claimed the Russian collusion, said he had evidence of it. And as we have learned, that wasn't the case. Listen.
I think it was a complete debacle. And, and if you'll pardon the expression, it was an ass backwards impeachment proceeding. Historically, what Congress has done when it believed a president was engaged in wrongdoing that might rise to the level of a high crime or misdemeanor is do a thorough investigation. Once you've done the investigation and believe there's a sound basis, then you start an impeachment inquiry. And at the end of that, you bring in the experts to evaluate the evidence you presented and put it in constitutional context. Well, today.
Now, let me ask you a question, sir. You bring in the experts and put it into context. I don't claim to be the expert you are on the Constitution of the United States of America, but I don't recall anything about impeachment requiring a bringing in of the experts. I'm pretty sure it's a political tool where the House impeaches and then the Senate holds a trial. This seems a massive moving of the goalposts.
Of course it is. I mean, this is how they deflect things. They move the goalposts. They insist that Republicans do what they never did with regard to the 2 impeachments of Donald Trump. They all announced he was guilty before they started any inquiry, based on a transcript, I think it was, of a phone call, somebody in Ukraine. So no, the Democrats never do this. And this is, again, why they're so much better than Republicans at this messaging. They just repeat it. MSNBC repeats it. New York Times, Washington Post. Or they're so much better at deflecting these things. There is a mountain of evidence for which to move forward on a formal impeachment inquiry. And at the end of that, when the evidence has been gathered, they can vote whether to move to an impeachment hearing where they'll take votes.
Would you do me a favor? Would you dig in for a moment on, I mention this on radio all the time, that impeachment is not legal, impeachment is political. While it is a process, it is indeed a political process. You agree or disagree with that statement?
Well, it is a political process. It's set forth in the Constitution. If there is an impeachment trial, which there were for Trump, it would be presided over by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. So it's a quasi-judicial process, but the decisions, you do not need experts. You do not need the levels of proof and the legal procedures that take place in a courtroom, because those legal procedures are specific to the court system. They're not specific to the impeachment system. So it is at its core a political process. We'd like to think that you would not impeach somebody and then have a trial without substantial evidence. But I think that with regard to Trump, certainly the first impeachment, very thin evidence that he did anything wrong. In fact, history has probably vindicated him, because what was he asking the Ukrainians about? It's about Joe Biden's corruption. And now we know that there was, whether it was illegal corruption or whether it was just not illegal corruption, influence peddling, which Jonathan Turley referred to, isn't necessarily a crime, depending how you do it. This is, the Democrats have shifted through their media operation the focus of the debate. The debate is not whether there's enough evidence to vote tomorrow to impeach Joe Biden and then put him on trial in the Senate. The question right now is there enough evidence to suggest that it requires further inquiry? And the answer is yes. I think that's so plainly obvious.
That brings us to Secretary Pete Buttigieg. It's almost as if the memo went around, sir. Listen to this.
It's insane. I mean, here we are, something like 50 hours from them shutting down the funds that we use to pay air traffic controllers who make sure that 16 million flights a year take off and land safely. And they're busy with shutdown. They're busy with impeachment they don't even know what for. They just want to have.
They don't even know what for. I was unaware, William Jacobson, legalinsurrection.com, Cornell Law Professor, that Congress can't do two things at once. And the possibility of government shutdown means you don't look into impropriety regarding the president of the United States.
Yeah, well, what he's saying is that because of the possibility of a shutdown, we should shut down now. We should stop doing anything. Okay. So we should do a preemptive shutdown because there's a shutdown that may or may not happen. I think it's probably likely. And of course, we all know when the federal government shuts down, it doesn't really shut down, at all. It continues to operate. There's all sorts of exceptions to that. But that's what they're doing. We can't look into Joe Biden's family corruption and influence peddling because the government might shut down. We'll deal with that when we get to it. But in the meantime, we've got somebody who, by all appearances, sold his office as vice president to benefit his family, maybe to benefit himself. We don't know, but certainly to benefit his family and his son, and sold his position as a likely presidential candidate for this cycle, and for the prior cycle also, to foreign bidders to enrich his family. I mean, it was the evidence of influence peddling by Joe Biden is overwhelming, but I think we need to know more. And Hunter Biden is now gone on offense. He's suing people for blowing the whistle on
suing the IRS and suing others. And I wonder if people would view it as the evidence on Hunter Biden and a peddling influence operation. That's crystal clear. The question is it crystal clear regarding President Joe Biden? I think that's where people want to make the distinction. I think that's what the inquiry is for. But would you argue for or against, after this day one and what you've seen of it, and certainly the reporting that you've read, should the Republicans keep going, or is this a fool's errand and put an end to it?
No, they've got to keep going. They've started it. Okay, you don't just call it off after day one because MSNBC is upset with you. Okay, and MSNBC is bringing on the same talking heads who say Donald Trump colluded with Russia and it committed treason. They're bringing on the same fools like Adam Schiff to now defend Joe Biden influence peddling for his family benefit. And I think under any corruption statute or any corruption prosecution, if you're engaged in political corruption and the money's going to your wife instead of you, or to your son instead of you, or your family, that's considered a benefit to you. Okay. And I think it's laughable that they would say the Biden clan got mega wealthy by selling Joe Biden's office, but that didn't implicate Joe at all. If he knew about it, then it's corruption.
Just really quick before I let you go, is that the legal standard that if it benefited your son, it could be seen as that benefited you and therefore it's the same?
Well, it depends on the circumstances, obviously the facts, but if you're selling your office, if you're selling political influence, but you say, hey, wire the money to my son, not to me, because I don't want it trailed to me, and I think that's probably what happened here, is that that message was sent. Don't you dare send money directly to Joe, send it to Hunter. So if you're influence peddling for your family benefit, I think that under most corruption statutes that I've seen, that would qualify.
William Jacobson, Cornell Law Professor, legalinsurrection.com. I always appreciate you taking the time. Always appreciate you being here, sir. Legalinsurrection.com.